Good evening, TNT family. We are most fortunate to have our sister Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial Ramdial. And Senator Jayanti, I kind of love the ring to the Lutchmedial Ramdial. I think that's uh,
Rhyming. Yes.
a perfect match, made in heaven.
Yes. Well,
So congratulate Mr. Ramdial on that one.
thank
you
you.
know yeah, so Senator, now we have seen it's one fiasco with the other with this government.
Of course.
And they try to spin things like if we are fools. So we've seen the latest here with the pension bill. And what I don't understand, I mean, far as I know, the pension was not a poor relief or a grant for the poor. It was an entitlement to all citizens. And I've seen the interference with it with the PNM, kind of putting stipulations on this. So can you explain that to us a little bit? Because we are not too familiar with the legal structure there.
All right. So basically, you have grants and you have a pension scheme, and you have contributory pension schemes, as well as you have pension schemes created in Trinidad and Tobago via the Senior Citizens Pensions Act, which um, really cater for persons who don't have an alternative form of income when they reach a certain age, meaning they don't qualify for another type of pension. So let's say you were never a public servant, you don't get a government pension, you weren't employed enough in a job that had operated some sort of pension scheme, right? So you don't have any pension. So you reach the age of 65 and you don't have a pension because either you never worked or you never worked in a capacity where there was a pension scheme, and you haven't contributed to national insurance, because of course it's only if you're employed with a company, the employer pays part, you pay part, and you have national insurance, and that's a contributory pension scheme. So the senior citizens pension was meant to cater for those types of persons. My two grandmothers, because of that, in that generation, many women didn't work. They worked in the home. They did odd things, but they never worked in a job whereby they would have received some sort of a pension. And things like annuities and so on weren't really that popular back in the day. So both of them received their pension. The requirement to receive the pension prior to this latest set of amendments that they tried to introduce is that you had to not be receiving over a certain amount of money per month, like from another type of pension plan or NIS or something else. You had to, of course, reach the age of 65, and you had to be a resident of Trinidad and Tobago. So it was age, income, and residency. Those were the three parameters, and those were the three requirements that you had to meet if you wanted to qualify for this pension. The amendments sought to sort of streamline those existing conditions, bring some clarity, particularly when it comes to residency and how you define residency and all of that, right? But in there contain what the government is now trying to refer to as an error. I want to say that this whole government is an error. The whole PNM seems to be an error. But they are saying that it was an error that a clause was inserted into the bill that created a fourth parameter, a fourth criteria for receiving this pension, which is that you must not have more than $25,000 in savings.
No, Senator,
Now,
I just want to disturb you here for a bit so that
sure.
you clarify something for the general public.
Mhm.
In the world, pensions, what explain to us, every single nation on this country, on this planet, have pensions for their old and vulnerable citizens. You just outlined that your grandmothers, your two grandmothers, my two grandmothers also, they were farmers, they were planters, and when they got old, they couldn't do that anymore. So a pension is important for those vulnerable citizens, and in
Yeah.
Trinidad, Tobago, our population needs to have something like that. Now they were even so. Maybe you should enlighten the listening audience as to which country in the world denies their citizens a pension.
Well, different countries in the world have different schemes created. Some of them have schemes, again, like side by side by like us. You have a scheme whereby a government run entity, like how we have National Insurance Board, will run a contributory pension scheme. Some of them have provisions for persons who don't qualify for the National Insurance contributory scheme. So you get it by because you don't have another. There are many different connotations which operate around the world in terms of pensions. And then, of course, you have countries where, and most countries have some sort of social relief. And that is where, our senior citizens pension sort of falls. It's a safety net. It's a social safety net that assists those who can't do better and just don't have access to anything otherwise. As you said, you might have been doing some type of work, self-employed. You can't access another type of pension. You have no pension, and you reach the age where you can't do that type of work anymore. So you access senior citizens. There will be people who work all their life as taxi drivers. You're self-employed. You can't, if you're self-employed, contribute to national insurance. So when you reach that age where you can no longer drive, let's say, and you can't drive as a private taxi driver anymore, whatever it is, you depend on the social safety net. So it is very important. It's very important because we have an aging population, meaning that long ago people would have 10 and 15 children, whereas now the average might be 2 or 3. It's, it will become a burden on younger generations. We no longer have the type of family structures that we had previously where, generations of families live in the same home or very in close proximity to each other. So, for example, you might have an elderly couple living in Chaguanas and their children living in Westmoreland or Diego Martin or Arima. That's normal, and you don't have people living in the same household to care for you. So you have to be able to take care of yourself to some extent. And that's why the pension is very important. And many countries, like I say, have different permutations and different connotations and call it different things. But at the end of the day, that is what we have had in place in Trinidad and Tobago for quite a number of years. So the move to introduce this new parameter, one, it seemed quite, well, one, I thought it was rather ridiculous, because if you start working at the age of 18, let's say, and you save $100 a month, which even in these in this banger season, that is still possible, right? If you save $100 a month, by the time you reach 65, you're going to have more than $25,000. And, much more than that if you're investing it. So it's almost like you're punishing people for having some sense of responsibility and being a little bit financially prudent and just trying to save the barest minimum amount of money throughout their lives, because that, I think, we can agree, is really barest minimum. So if at the age of 65, you have $25,000 saved, that really is you've really done just barely what you should have been doing all your life. So that one seemed quite ridiculous. There was a massive public outcry about it. And, why the government was seeking to really create that restriction, and no one was really saying anything. The minister firstly tried to defend it and say, well, it's not meant for people who have money. And famously, the minister said, I know people in the PNM have arrived and serving in government without passing maths, but like some of them didn't pass English either. She said, it have people who, they have money, and this is not for them. This is if you don't have any money. So it seemed to be really at that threshold of $25,000. It seemed to be targeting people who even with that, because anybody who understands cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago understands that really is the absolute barest minimum that somebody at 65 years could have and could feel some sort of sense of security. And if you are not giving people a pension at 65 and they can't work and all they have is $27,000 in the bank, how long do you expect that to last? One severe illness could finish in a week, and again, those of us who understand the cost of healthcare in Trinidad and Tobago, that some things aren't available privately. If you have to wait for it, publicly, if you have to wait publicly to get attention, your life could be at risk. People have to access things privately, etc. So we understand the need for it. And that's where the public outcry came about. The next day, lo and behold, we see the Attorney General and the Minister of Social Development in a news conference saying that was never the intention of the government and that was never included as part of the policy that was approved. after cabinet approved the policy and it had gone to something called the Legislative Review Committee, a public officer, someone in the public service, suggested that, and it found its way into the bill somehow. That has to be in all of the lies and instances of absolute dishonesty we have heard, that has to be the absolute worst, most ridiculous, most paltry excuse that I've ever heard anybody come up with. And anyone who understands the legislative process will know that what they are saying happened is really impossible if you understand how a bill is drafted and makes its way to Parliament. And I'll go through that in a little while for people who don't know, and so that they could understand why this is this is beyond ridiculous and completely impossible that this could have happened. I think the government would have actually gotten some more stripes if they had simply called a press conference and say, look, we've noted the concerns being raised by the public. Perhaps we need to take a second look at this, and so we will withdraw it. But rather than do that, they choose, because for some reason they choose dishonesty, they choose underhandedness, they choose to try to hide their callous, because that's what it came across as. It came across as a very callous move to exclude a number of persons who are still by all means, and no matter how you look at it, are still very vulnerable people, because if all they have is savings, but they are 65 years old, they don't have another form of pension, and they live here, then it's fair to say that they would be very vulnerable people who ought to be served by the social safety net, and the government is simply trying to kick them out of the system. So let me tell you why their excuse is so lame and makes no sense. The cabinet makes and approves policy. As a minister, you have to create a policy and say, okay, this is the policy I want. It needs legislation to back it up, but these are the things that will be addressed. So any minister, the Minister of Health, could come up with a policy saying, I want to introduce a new policy whereby all persons who have not been resident for more than 15 years in Trinidad and Tobago cannot access public health care. Let's just say that. I'm just making things up, right? He would have to draft the policy. He would have to say why, how many people will be affected, what will be the savings cost to the government by this policy, if that is the reason, because we have too much dependence on our public healthcare system by people who aren't actually resident here, but who are just maybe here illegally, etc., etc., etc. You draft it, you take it to cabinet. Cabinet has to approve it. It is only when the policy is approved, then you start drafting the bill. So the Ministry of Social Development would have drafted a policy to say we need to have the law streamlined in order to cater for this age and residency requirements. We need to streamline what is residency, what is that requirement, how it can be met, etc., etc. This is what I need to be done. It would have been approved and it would have been sent to the drafts people to draft it. You have something called the Legislative Review Committee, where a number of ministers, I don't know who sits on it now. In my experience back in the day, I could tell you it was always chaired by the Attorney General, that committee. And the committee would have other ministers, and different public officers will appear before the committee and contribute. So you would have staff from the Ministry of Social Development, you may have staff from the Ministry of Finance, you might have staff from the Ministry from the department that actually does the drafting, and so on and so forth. And at that stage, amendments can be proposed, but when the final bill in its final form, before it reaches the Parliament, it will have to go back to cabinet. It will have to say what the amendments that were introduced, why they were introduced, and if it's a substantial amendment, that has to be approved by the cabinet, and it must be contained in the cabinet note, and it has to be approved. So somebody was either, if it is that happened and it went back to cabinet and nobody did, is either somebody was very sloppy with the drafting of the note and they were all asleep during the Legislative Review Committee. But either way, and I don't believe that for a minute, because I cannot believe that such a large group of people could be so slack and so incompetent. But the thing about it is that they prefer to feign incompetence rather than say the truth, which I believe to be what I believe to be the truth, which is that it was always their intention. The policy that went to cabinet was always to introduce this new criteria that will significantly reduce the number of people who can access this pension. And that could be the only reason why they would want to do something like this. And the reason why I believe this is the actual truth and what happened for a couple of reasons. One, the fact that the Minister of Finance has been on record complaining about the amount of money that goes into social grants. He specifically made mention of the fact that people are living longer. And so the senior citizens grant is one of those things that creates a drain. Well, he thinks of it as a drain on the system. It is a significant cost to the government. And he mentioned that before in one of his, either his budget or his midterm reviews, stating that this is a significant cost to the government. And highlighted it as one of the costs. And, he's always complaining about the amount of money the government has to spend and salaries and this. And he has, from time to time, really, I wouldn't say targeted, but he has pinpointed the social safety net and senior citizens pension, the amount of money spent on pensions and so on, right? The second thing why I don't believe it is that I don't know if you all would recall that the former Attorney General had reported the head of the Chief Parliamentary Council's department, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel himself, Mr. Ian McIntyre. He had reported him for subordination. And it just so happened on the day that he wrote that letter was the day he was removed as Attorney General for maybe that and other reasons, I don't know. But the reason why he had complained is because the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who is in charge of that department that actually drafts the laws, refused to take instructions from the AG directly and wanted to see the approved policy by the cabinet. You see, we tend to say things about public servants and we think that they don't do their jobs or whatever. But let me tell you something. When it comes to certain types of work done within the Ministry of the Attorney General, within other ministries as well, and when it comes to legal work, these people don't play. They just don't. They are not going to come vai and hear somebody say, well, why we don't limit this thing to, people who, because all of them people who have money in the bank and them don't need pension, they're not going to listen to that and be like, oh, okay, let me draft that into the bill and send it back and send it off to Parliament. It doesn't work that way. You have that procedure where the approved cabinet and the Chief Parliamentary Counsel said, I'm not taking instructions from you and my staff is not going to take instructions from you and do work unless I see the approved policy by cabinet. And Mr. McIntyre said very vehemently that, listen, the Westminster protocol, the system that we follow is that the cabinet or the prime minister makes policy, which is to be drafted into law, not the Attorney General. No one minister does it. There's that thing called collective responsibility in government. So the cabinet as a whole is responsible for government policy that finds its way into the law books. And he wanted to see the approved policy. So how do you reach from there to somebody drafting a provision into the law and nobody knowing that it's there? Something is very wrong. And I highly doubt that you could get from that extreme to the other. And the reason why they always ask to see the policy is to avoid situations like this. And they have to draft in accordance with the approved policy. The note that is sent to cabinet, the minute from cabinet saying we approve this is how it has to be done. And that is what they use to draft their bills. The third reason why I don't believe that this is an actual, was an actual error is that the Minister of Social Development defended it not 24 hours before this press conference where they claimed that this was an error. If somebody was making an error, why did you defend it? Why did you come out strongly saying that this was something that was needed? It is obvious that you wanted it there, and that doesn't make any sense to me. That one day a minister is, if I were the minister responsible for a bill and I know that I asked for A, B, and C, and then the media comes to me and say, well, what about D? People are very upset about D being in the bill. I would say, well, I didn't ask for D. I asked for A, B, and C. Instead, the minister said, no, D is needed. D is thing. That is exactly what it is. She was defending it to the end. She was very adamant that this was a requirement that she viewed as necessary into the law. So how the next day you come and be like, well, we didn't want that. That was never our intention. We don't even know how that got hit. It's somebody brought that up and it arrived in there. makes absolutely no sense. And they have made themselves look like complete fools by actually trying to say that those provisions came into the bill without their knowledge, without their approval, and without it being the actual intention of the government. Because clearly, you cannot, for all the reasons outlined, you can't be arguing in favor of something. You can't be highlighting it as a problem. You can't be knowing that people are not going to do that. Public servants aren't going to do that type of thing without getting instructions, and then defending it, and then saying, "Oh, oops, sorry, no, that's not supposed to be there. We never intended for it to be there. You very well intended for it to be there. You've highlighted it as a problem in the past, and you wanted it there. So I don't believe that." And the next reason, and I think is the most obvious reason why nobody believes anything that they say, is because they just have a history of being dishonest. They have a history, and coming out of the Ministry of the Attorney General in particular, I have found that I was speaking to somebody the other day, and we said that we want to we now calling the ministry, the Attorney General, the Grinch who stole good governance, because it appears that whereas the Ministry of the Attorney General, that office of the Attorney General, is supposed to be the guardians of the Constitution, they are supposed to be the legal advisors to the cabinet. They're the ones who are supposed to defend our Constitution and defend democracy. Um, Under this Attorney General in particular, we have seen, and the previous one, you've really seen a total breakdown in the respect for the rule of law. You've seen a total breakdown in good governance. You've seen, um, the abuse of that office in order to, I would say, break the law and not follow the law. So the government, rather than an Attorney General being the um, you know, the captain to steer the ship, I would say, and keep the government in line with our constitution, this Attorney General seems to be aiding and abetting. And you have to think, you just have to think back to earlier this year with the Auditor General, Devico, and understand that he is aiding and abetting his cabinet colleagues in, I think, completely disobeying the law and, not really being accountable, not upholding, transparency in governance, and a whole host of things that this government, we can just go on and on and on about so many of the things that they have done, that they ought not to do. So I think that's the final reason why I would say nobody believes that this thing was not intentional, and that it is the vigilance of Mrs. Prasad Visesa who brought this up at the last Monday night meeting that caused this public outcry, this outrage. And rather than admit it and to accept that they were perhaps too hasty to introduce provisions like this, and that they would have a look at it again and perhaps, um, reconsider it, they try to cover it up as a mistake. So,
Senator, I want to come in with another reason. That wasn't the final reason. When the PNM came into office, they have demonstrated, and Dr. Rowley told us, wean yourselves off the government. And all their policies and programs were designed to do exactly that. When they removed the subsidies, the fuel subsidies, that was weaning. When everything that they have done, when they removed the book grant, when they cut back on scholarships, when they cut back on GATE, everything was designed to wean the poor and vulnerable of the government. That is what their intention was from day one. And Dr. Rowley said that on many times. So that is another reason why this went on.
yeah, well, and the reason for that, and like as I mentioned, the Minister of Finance has repeatedly singled out senior citizens and the pension and the fact that people are living longer. Because remember, when you qualify for that pension at 65, it's until death. So
Right.
they've he highlighted that issue, and yes, but the reason why they have to do that too is because the country's broke, and it became broke under them. They have created
course.
absolutely zero new revenue streams. They have created the crime situation we've had negative foreign direct investments in some years. They mismanaged the whole COVID, issue when it from an economic, from a health standpoint, as well as from an economy, the standpoint of the economy. They've done a real hatch job um, in terms of the country and revenue stream. So whereas under Mrs. Prasad Visesa, you could have built schools and police stations and hospitals and given expanded gates and given more scholarships and give book grants and um, give textbooks and so many different things. You forget all these grants that we created for the poor and the vulnerable, the baby grant, which they like to cry down all the time. But at the end of the day, and it goes to their short-sightedness because they don't understand too that a grant is not just giving away free money. It's trying to improve the standard of living for people so that even in their own lifetime they can rise out of poverty, or that at least the next generation can rise out of poverty. Like I talk about my grandmothers, my two grandmothers getting old age pension, but their children all went to university and they lived off old age pension, but they made sure that their children went to university and they even helped to educate some of their grandchildren. So that is how that's one of the ways that grants and so on and social support can assist people, because there are different periods of time in people's life where they require that type of support. I'm not saying there isn't abuse. They keep going, people abuse it. That's true. People abuse the system. Why not focus, rather than try to limit people's access to it across the board? Why not try to clean up the system and get rid of the abuse of the system? There are people who are still collecting pension for persons who are dead. You need to find those cases and weed them out. If people aren't living in Trinidad, they're living abroad or they're working abroad and they have income abroad, they own property abroad, they're renting properties and so on, and they get it abroad, then yes, they shouldn't qualify for this particular senior citizens pension in Trinidad. But those are the cases you need to go after. Those are the cases, the people you need to find, not just put up a whole broad brush limits on thing based on something as ridiculous as savings. That's the other thing, based on at such a low threshold as well. It's unfair, it's ridiculous, and it's almost like you're trying to punish people for being financially responsible throughout their life.
Good night,
exactly.
Senator.
I saw that.
Good night. Yes.
Hi, good night, Arjun Haripol here.
Hi, good night. How are you?
I am good, thanks. Sorry, I joined a few minutes late, but I just wanted to make this little contribution. So you're talking about the two administrations here, and I know while we don't talk about governments to the left and governments to the right and that kind of thing in this country, clearly the Kamla Prasad Bisesa administration would have focused attention on the poor and the vulnerable. And whereas the PNM, of course, centers its focus on big business, reflected in the Prime Minister's statement, the rich will get richer and so on.
Yeah, that's a type of, they used to call that Thatcheronomics, like Margaret Thatcher style.
Exactly, Reaganomics and Reaganomics. You remember that?
Exactly, Thatcheronomics and Reaganomics, yeah.
Exactly. But one thing, and putting on my economist hat now, one thing we don't focus too much on is when you give those grants that you mentioned a whole host of them. When you give those grants to the poor and the vulnerable in society, what happens is they spend every last cent of that,
Correct.
And that creates
circulating in the economy.
Exactly. You have that circulation in the economy, which creates employment from the taxi driver to the little shop on the corner and so on and so on. And that money keeps circulating in the economy and creates employment. Right?
At the end of the day, it's not like, and it's the thing, again, you always have the one-off cases or whatever, right? But by and large, people who are getting this pension, they are people who they're spending that money by in the pharmacy. They're spending that money to pay the bills back to the same government because it's your tea and tech, your WASA, your property tax, whatever it is they have to pay.
Right.
That's where the money goes. It's not they're not fetting, they're not flying, they're not traveling, they're not going outside to vacation, on a $3,500 pension. You know what I mean? So it is money that's going to be circulated.
And whereas big businesses increase their profits, yes, they may expand their business and so on. But we are in a situation in Trinidad now where the outlook for the economy is so bad that people are not investing. So these monies, these extra profits are going into the hands of the shareholders, and a lot of it is being remitted and saved banked abroad and so on and so forth. Now we look at the foreign exchange situation, we wonder what's happening, but Has anybody sat down and done an analysis of where the former net foreign exchange earners, why are they no longer net foreign exchange earners? Where those foreign exchange that they're earning going? And my guess is that they are being banked abroad and not brought back into the country.
Well,
So
that's one. And then we had a net foreign exchange, which is now sitting as scrap iron at point to pay.
exactly,
Or
exactly.
fine.
But
Yeah.
but that is history now, and they admitted it finally that Petrotrim was a net foreign exchange earner,
Yeah.
but from the private sector. And because business operate on confidence, and in
I
the
was
last,
just going to say that exactly. Without that
yeah,
confidence, you're not going to get people to reinvest in their foreign earnings and
exactly.
the country.
So
Yeah.
so direct foreign investment has died a long time ago since this administration came on. It's actually negative now because you have profits, the foreign investors in Trinidad remitting profits. So it's
Yeah.
actually negative right now.
Mhm.
And the local businesses are themselves not bringing back any. So we're getting hit all around.
Mhm. Yeah, you're correct. And I'm glad you raised the word confidence. If you don't have a government that, and it comes back down to this, if you have a government that cannot get a grip on crime, if you have a government where there are so many red flags and question marks over their head when it comes to transparency and how things are done, and the manner in which they govern the country, they have been incredibly secretive. They have been they've scandal after scandal. They just hope for the next distraction to go away, but there's never any accountability. You have issues like the ease of doing business. They keep boasting about it, but look at what has happened on the port for Christmas.
Yeah.
Up to today, I was at a place, a small business, a small business, and the place was complaining about stock coming in. It's a couple days, 4 days before Christmas, and I know business owners who would have bought things specifically for the Christmas season, and they simply can't get it off the ports. Up to now, they have those issues. So, how are you going to encourage investment when the environment within which you expect people to operate and businesses to operate and so on is just simply not conducive? You're not going to get that, and so it comes back down to bad. We're not earning revenue. We've closed down foreign exchange earners like Petrotrin. They've really done a real hatchet job on the economy, and because of that now they're broke and they have to find a way to save money. And who are they targeting? The poor and the vulnerable. Look, at the end of the day, and you mentioned the different in the style of governance, right? There's a lot of history, and it's not that far back history, but you have to remember the UNC, this particular party came out of the labor movement. We were the DLP, we were the ULF, we were those parties that came together. That's where we were born. We
So
were born
true.
out of the
So
struggle
true.
of the working class. So the whole emphasis on assisting and creating the environment for the working class to thrive and to live and to grow and to improve themselves. So the focus on things like education, the focus on things like assistance to smaller people, and that focus on the small man, it's part of the political identity and philosophy of this particular political party, as opposed to the other, which, as you rightly said, the prime minister says nothing wrong with rich people getting richer, and that is a philosophy that is not unique to him. It's a philosophy that's shared around many other political parties. It's an ideology that many political parties in different countries hold to. They are, many Americans feel that the capitalist culture is the right culture, and maybe that's why the election went the way that it did, and they focus on that. They prefer that route as opposed to more emphasis on the social side. But we are socialist democrats at the end of the day in the UNC. That's kind of the underlying philosophy, and again, it goes back to our history and how we came about.
I just wanted to pick up on the other thing you said about government being broke.
Mhm.
And two things I want to note here. One, I'm not sure how many people took notice of the recent action by the central bank, my favorite place in Trinidad, as you very well know. They recently took an action to reduce the reserve requirements of commercial banks.
Mhm.
And the primary reason for that is to release a certain amount of money that the banks can now lend.
Mm-hmm.
Lending to the private sector has diminished. Lending to households have diminished. That lending is going to government. So basically, they now have a new source of revenue. Well, not revenue, but loans to continue to, to fund their activities. Now, and that is bad because we are now going to continue to run up debts in the country, which will have to be repaid at some point. That's one thing. The second thing is we have found ourselves in Trinidad where government's current revenues cannot finance government's current expenditure. So
Yeah.
we are borrowing
Yeah.
to finance current expenditure. Imagine borrowing basically to finance domestic everyday expenses, not
Yeah.
to finance things
Like
that will bring
investments and
revenues into the
programs
future.
and yeah, exactly. And and that's one thing that people say, well, government's always borrowed. Governments traditionally would be able to at least meet your current expenditure, and you would borrow in terms of you want to build a new hospital, or you want to build a new whatever, something that will generate revenue in the future.
Yeah, your
We're not borrowing
so-called
for
capital
that. We
expenditures.
borrowing to pay salaries. We are
Yes,
borrowing to pay everyday
yes.
expenses that the public service will incur, and that's a very dangerous situation that we're in. The
What
whole thing
the
about
what the
lowering the reserve
Senator,
requirement
what the economists call consumption. So you are borrowing to
for
finance consumption, not
yeah, not
investment.
investments, exactly. And when you talk about the lowering of the reserve requirements, so that the banks could now lend more to the private sector and so on, you also have to consider, are the private sector willing to borrow anymore, because they themselves just are like, they just don't know where the money is going to come from to be able to repay these debts. So you're going to see more and more businesses either finding themselves, I mean, there's so many business people now, they'll tell you, they say, everything I have is just mortgaged right up. It's right up, mortgaged out. People are struggling, businesses are struggling, and there are very few businesses. How many businesses do you see reporting massive profits? One is banks,
Yep,
because everybody basically borrowing to survive.
yep.
Beyond the banks, you would see just the multinational corporations, the huge ones. But so many other businesses are really struggling. And like I say, any small business that you look at, the time of year when they make a lot of money and they kind of keep their head above water for the rest of the year is like Christmas time, back to school time and all of that. And all these times of the year when they should be doing a lot, and they are suffering as a result of simple management issues within government. So management on the port, issues like paying their taxes, guess it, those things is just the environment is just not conducive for business to thrive. I'll give you a very simple example. I went into a store in the mall today, and I saw, it's a clothes store, a children's clothes store, right? And like 50% of the store is just Christmas stuff, Christmas dresses, Christmas outfits, Santa Claus, reindeer, elf, whatever, thing. And I was just looking at them thinking, there's a lot of stock in the store, and nobody's going to buy any of it until, once Christmas is over. People would dress their kids in that type of clothes throughout the month of December, all the Christmas parties, all the this, all the that, that's what you buy that type of clothes for, right? And I'm looking around and thinking to myself, like, well, they're not going to sell all of this out. And I was like, you have a lot of stock, and I mentioned. And the owner of the store is then, she said, do you know that it's only yesterday I was able to clear my stock? So that I've
Oh my
had people coming in here. So that I've had people coming in here every day for the month of December, or even before, because from the time class parties start at the end of term test at the end of November, people ask for these things. People have been coming into it. It's a very big popular mall. And she said people have been coming for 2-3 weeks now, asking every day. And she said I just have to turn them away because I did not have my goods. So I went away in August and I ordered all of my goods and and this is what has happened. Which says I don't know what I'm going to do with all of this. I don't know how I'm paying for it after this, because I'm not going to sell anything beyond Christmas this week, because I'm Monday and Tuesday, and that's it. I am not selling anything again, And that is just one person on a small scale, but multiply that by all of the people affected by these things, and you understand why we have a problem with money in this country and economy and business doing well. and why the government is broke. Because those same people who, if they were making money, would then be paying
Pay
taxes and so
taxes, yeah,
on, government.
yeah, yeah.
You
And
know,
not to mention, of course, it was 65,000 people who have lost jobs in the last few years.
of course, and how
Those
many small
people,
businesses closed down
those
during
people
COVID that never
would have been,
reopened.
yeah,
Yeah.
would have been paying PAYEs, which is affecting government revenues as
Of
well.
course, yeah, of course.
I think it was today or recently or maybe yesterday. I think it was the president of Doma who made a statement saying that he was quite surprised the lack of reaction from the business community to what has happened on the port. He thought there should have been a bigger hue and cry about what happened on the port.
And I I don't know if people have just become so
Numb, maybe.
numb and used to it, and they just, and but they don't realize too, because look, we have a problem with people importing goods illegally, the suitcase traders not declaring goods, so you're avoiding taxes by doing that, etc., etc. But you understand why they do it. I'm not saying
Yeah,
it's right, but you
yeah,
understand why people, so you understand that by frustrating people out of the legal system of doing things, you drive them towards the illegal methods. Because if
yeah,
you talk to people and you understand, like I've met people who have been charged by customs and so on for doing illegal things and whatnot. I mean, yeah, they're like, listen, it's too much. We just can't go through it. I cannot run a business by doing it this way. And you go down in the port, you have to bribe somebody if you want to get your goods out. You have to do this, you have to do that. They're frustrating you. And so they end up doing other things. And that's the way and that's why crime can't done either. You're frustrating people into some of those things.
yeah.
If the system worked well, you would have less of those things. You'd have less occurrences like that. So of course they preach that the answer to all of this is the border what revenue authority. Well, I I I'm waiting to see, because I have very little confidence in this government's ability to execute anything properly, and rightly so. If you had told me 4 years ago that I was just saying that because I don't like the PNM, I might say, meh, maybe. But now I think I have sufficient evidence to say with absolute confidence that this government cannot implement anything and cannot implement anything properly. They can't even finish widen 2 lane on the highway between Chase Village and Shogunas. All right, look at how many things they simply cannot execute anything properly. And the bottom line to all of this conversation that we've just had is that they are broke, they have no money, and they are looking towards ways, they're looking for ways to cut expenditure and generate revenue. The ticket people are out in full force, trying to meet their quota of tickets they issue every day. They are they try and what are they targeting in terms of cutting expenditure? The social safety net that so many of our elderly citizens depend on, and that truly is, I think, a travesty for a government to focus on that area at a time like this, when you, like I said, all the circumstances, the fact that the healthcare system in the country just is not functioning at the level it needs to function at, where people can, access almost anything in a efficient manner through the health sector. And if you don't have money, how many people would you hear say every day, if you don't have money to go privately insurance because with certain things that happen to you, you're dead. And that's the sentiment of a lot of people. So people who are waiting for different services, people who sometimes you go to the hospital and say, well, look, we can't, you need this blood test done for us to treat you, but we can't run the test today because we don't have the particular whatever it is they need to do it, the size and needle, they don't have the antigens, they don't have the test tubes, all kinds of things they run out something else. So go and do your test privately and come back and we'll join you in the clinic. That's what you're told sometimes when you go to the hospital. So people need to have money for basic things like healthcare, and particularly our elderly people. So if you're targeting somebody and you choose to target the elderly, it's almost like you're saying, well, look, use out your savings if you have it, and then if it as we obviously say, who dead and who live. That seems to be the philosophy that this government abides by.
Senator, I don't think it's coincidental. This government has embarked on a kind of policy of targeted intervention from day one. So even with this pension and this 25,000 threshold that they mentioned, really it is to punish those who have been responsible and who've been looking to take care of their
And
future into
and
retirement
that's
and
why,
so on.
yeah, and that's how I've always felt about property tax as well. You invest money to buy a home and to make your home nicer, and because
Right.
of that, you're being punished with higher taxes, as
But
opposed
but
to
but
somebody being
also
like,
but also to reward those who have been wanton in their behavior.
exactly,
And they've
exactly.
lived their lives saying, well, the government will take care of us. And
Hmm.
that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah. And I mean, the system of annual rental value and all of that on property taxes, it's ridiculous. And it's almost like when you look at the services being provided, but which they say would be provided by way of the property tax, which is local government services. If I invest or if I retire, like many people do in this country, and when they get your gratuity, you spend half of that gratuity fixing up your house, making sure it's comfortable for you to live out the rest of your life. You're putting security cameras, you're putting, because look at the crime situation, you're putting in cameras, you make sure your burglar proof and strong, you ain't getting water every day, so you had to have 2 or 3 water tanks. All of those things factor into the valuation of your property, right? So
Yep.
when you do those things and you're responsible and you're trying to take care of yourself, you will pay more taxes
You've
as
been
opposed to
punished.
the person who not doing anything with their house and living or renting or doing whatever. And does my garbage, because I live in a nicer home that I've invested in and fix up and buy water tanks and so on, does my garbage cost more to fix up to pick up than the person next door? Aren't we all driving on the same road? Aren't we all going to use the same services of regional corporations provide? Aren't we, will I have more access to the pavilion ground within the district than the person next door who's paying less tax than me? No, we will all have access to equal services. Just I will be paying more because I choose to spend money to improve my home, and that
Yep.
in itself feels very unfair to a number of people.
Yep.
So failed policies, fail, but let's go now. I mean, you're talking about some of the things about petition and so on. What about the kind of money that the government has invested badly and that they have, invested in things like, look at Nikon. Look at where Nikon has ended up. We were supposed to, that was a failed WGTL project that they sold off to Nikon, and it was supposed to be that we were going to get returns to the state for that, that sale. Nikon is now bankrupt. So we've not just failed to create new revenue streams, we've also lost a lot of money in overruns, cost overruns on vanity projects, cost overruns on any kind of project, everything. Look at what the opposition leader exposed recently with the Tobago terminal. People keep saying we're building a new airport in Tobago. They're not even building an airport, they're building a terminal building. It's not even a new airport. The terminal building is what they're building. They have no runway, and I mean, I think they've extended the
It's a
runway
wing. It's a wing, basically a wing of
a
the
wing,
airport.
yeah, and look at the kind of money and look at the kind of cost overruns that they are incurring. So there's a lot of wastage. There's a lot of and then who's going to pay the price for it? It's going to be perhaps the pensioners, because, and I keep harping on that because all of this talk about an error, and so on, and all the reasons why we don't believe them. What I do believe is that if people put God out of their thoughts and allow this government a third term in office, I bet your bottom dollar, I will see that you will see that provision coming back in. You will see that, and perhaps many more provisions to cut social grants and parts of the social safety net for persons if the government comes in, because they simply do not, they, they simply don't know what else to do at this point in time, it appears, and that is their. I mean, there are other things that governments can do, but that seems to be where their focus is. Their focus is and has consistently been on, as somebody said, weaning people off the government. So you will see further reductions in things like, grants and assistance to like single parent homes, even there's so many things that people depend on.
All the social
School
services.
feeding,
Yeah.
yeah, school feeding. Those things are very, very. People are very dependent on those things, and you may very well see further reductions in things like that, not just in old age pension, but things that affect other vulnerable groups in society, while they try to wean you off. But they, at the same time, and I think that's the bigger one now, at the same time, they are not weaning themselves off at all. They are
Quite
agreed
the
to
opposite.
accept. They have agreed to accept some very hefty pay increases in order to ensure that they are quite comfortable in their retirement. And I think that is the irony, and that is the part of it that I think felt like a real slap in the face to members of our country, to citizens of the country, when this whole issue of the pension arose. It's like you're targeting one of the most vulnerable groups because of the cost of the government being able to do that, but you pay no heed when it comes to your own pocket, and well, how far you're willing to go to increase the size of that pocket. So that is something that again, we hope the population is paying attention. And there's a saying that when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I think that this government has shown us not once, not twice, but many times who they really are and what they stand for. And I think it's about time the population starts to believe them and understand what you need to do to get rid of them and to restore some level of accountability and some level of just care and concern for the well-being of citizens. Because like I said, when we came on here, we started to talk about the lie and the dishonesty and the fact that nobody was believing the excuse that they came up with. But the bigger picture and the bigger underlying picture to all of that is not just that they are dishonest or whatever. It's their policies. The policies that they are implementing are very anti-people, anti-poor, anti-the vulnerable in society.
Bold-faced, very
They're,
bold disrespect towards
yeah,
the
it's their
population.
philosophy. It's their philosophy.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I've looked at the Attorney General, a response to the press. Well, don't feel because it's the pressure or cry out there that I change anything. That alone tells me a lot about him and his
mhm,
disregard for anybody in the country. And
mhm. And
and I have. Go ahead, go ahead.
I know a caring government and a caring attorney general will say, I've seen and I've heard the cries of the population,
Correct.
and so I have decided that now is not the time perhaps for us to move forward with this, and I will give it further consideration and have further discussion. That's what a real caring government of the people who care about people would do and come out and say. But they are not that government. They are a government with hubris and a government with arrogance, and that's how they have governed for the last 9 years. And so they prefer to choose the route of arrogance, where they would say, it's not because all this say, it's not because we're getting pushback, about this that I taking it out, don't feel so. I doing it because that was never the intention. And don't question me any further. And there was a point in time where someone tried to ask the Minister of Social Development about, well, why she defended the policy. And he jumped in. He jumped in and basically stopped her from answering the question. And that in itself says that, look, the man is such a bold-faced, brazen liar. I mean, he comes across very, very dishonest, and most people feel that he has been less than forthcoming in terms of what has really transpired with this and many other matters.
As a
Totally
lawyer yourself,
heartless.
Senator,
Uh-huh.
as a lawyer yourself, I find it curious that the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago is extremely quiet.
Well,
Well, the law association, I said it in a post recently. The association is well aware of who Mr. Armour is. He was the president of that law association for a while. They forgave him for his errors in the United States, and maybe they they're condoning this.
yeah. I
And
mean,
I think it
at a
might be another
minimum,
PNM party group. The law association might be another PNM party group.
at a minimum, I would have thought that the law association should have asked for some clarification as to which departments within government, if that is Mr. Armour's story and he's sticking to it, which department of government decided to put something into a bill send it to cabinet, and then or at least ask if nobody them approve of. So I don't know if we had gotten to this part, but when the bill went back to goes back to cabinet now after the legislative review committee stage, and you can make amendments, there's a note that accompanies the bill, and the cabinet must read the note and read the whole bill and approve it for it to go to the house to be laid. So that is the day that happened, is the day that Mr. Armour was saying he was not in the country, right? But you can't have a cabinet without an attorney general. So somebody was acting as attorney general. So who was it that in the shoes of the attorney general on that faithful day when Mr. Armour was not here, who took that bill or who sat in cabinet when that bill came with a note and didn't notice that there was this provision in it? And those are the simple questions that the UNC has been asking, but which I would expect the Law Association to come out and ask. Is it that the Chief Parliamentary Council put in the provision, and then we should say they are lawyers as well, right? They are members of the profession. They should clarify that. Is it that it was somebody from the Ministry of Social Development who drafted and approved the cabinet note? Was it the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Social Development and then didn't highlight that this is an entirely, because this is not like you change a full stop and a comma in the bill, no. This is an entire shift in policy in terms of introducing a whole new criteria to qualify for this senior citizens pension under the act, right? So that is a major policy shift and a policy change. So how does that get in there, and none of them sitting on the cabinet became aware of it? They don't read, they don't do their work. A permanent secretary didn't put that into the notes. That didn't come back to cabinet as an amendment to the policy for approval. That's crazy. That is insane. And if that did happen, which I said I don't believe so. But if it did happen, then you have a serious breakdown in the processes and procedures of lawmaking in this country. And that should send off alarm bells, if not to the common man who may not understand the seriousness of that situation. It should send off alarm bells in the minds of every attorney in this country, and particularly those who sit in the law association and who claim and have offered themselves as persons to serve the profession by safeguarding the profession, because that is a very, very serious matter.
Yeah, but they did nothing when he said he was just a note taker. They said nothing when he lost files, blame public servants again for his own sloppiness and incompetence. The Law Association said nothing.
Spent about $1 million for an investigation and refused to disclose the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also the legal fees, that this Attorney General office under this government. That's another thing we have seen, that has become a big
Secrecy.
issue.
Lack
of transparency with it.
Yeah, total lack of transparency. And then when you talk about the amount of money that's being spent, they blame the UNC. But, they were paying the attorney. When the Attorney General had the opportunity to intervene and to deal with the impasse between the Ministry of Finance and Control of Accounts and the Auditor General, he briefed it out to external counsel to send pre-action protocol letters to the Auditor General. So they are spending money as they see fit. They don't want to account to the population for it. And, they deflect by, talking about things that look at it. I mean, everything, anything that they are caught doing, anything that they are criticized for, anything that doesn't go right, they will simply talk about things that happened more than 9 years ago, and it creates a distraction for a handful of people in the population, I would say, and that's who they pander to, and that's what they want to do. They just want to create that distraction. I can tell you this: if 1% of the things that have happened under this government happened under another government, I think that the response would have been very different from top to bottom, from every association, every union, every interest group. I think there are certain groups in this country that used to be clamoring for transparency and accountability. I think they closed down. I think all of them have wrapped up, closed up shop, and left the country, because I don't hear from them at all anymore. And
no, they'll come alive again after the next election. They very sure of
very vocal in the past.
Yeah.
You don't hear from them at all.
I hope the incoming administration is prepared mentally for what will happen. Port of Spain will heat up. Simply because you are going to have to take some very tough decisions to get this economy back on track. There's no easy road from here. In fact, I was telling a colleague of mine, the most difficult job facing Trinidad in 2025 will not be the prime minister, it will be the minister of finance.
Mm.
That is going to be the most difficult job in Trinidad,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
And
it certainly will be difficult, and you don't even know what you're really going to meet inside there because you can't believe anything that they
exactly,
say.
exactly. You will spend the first month doing an audit to find out where you are really, because you
Yeah,
don't know what to believe right now.
correct,
And when
correct.
you find out, you might be very surprised at what you find out. So it's going to be a very difficult job for whoever gets that role.
Mm-hmm.
And the Port of Spain, as I said, is going to heat up. All of these dormant people will come alive and be re-energized. It's a different rule for the PNM and a different rule for anybody else. So we know that, and we know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
But Senator, I want you to explain something for me, and I'm sure there are other listeners who would probably benefit from it as well. The role of the Attorney General in our system, and I understand he is the legal advisor to the cabinet and so on, but doesn't he also have a role to protect the interest of the public, people like me?
Of course, and that's why I say they're also the guardians of the constitution and guardians of our democracy because they are the protectors of the public interest, legally speaking. It's like you are the lawyer for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of ensuring that the rule of law is upheld and maintained by the arms of the state. So when you see a colleague, for example, in the Ministry of Finance doing something that is in breach of the law and not following what the law says that they're supposed to do, etc., etc. It is your job to intervene and advise them correctly. And let me go back to the Auditor General issue. When the Ministry of Finance was basically trying to get the Auditor General to accept amended accounts after the deadline for the acceptance of accounts, the role of the Attorney General was to say the deadline has passed. She cannot accept it. However, there is a provision that will extend the time by which the accounts be laid in Parliament and be sent to Parliament, and therefore we can go to Parliament and extend that time, and then we can try to resolve this impasse. They didn't do that. Instead, they sent no letters threatening the woman, pre-action protocol letters, basically threatening her and trying to intimidate her and forcing her to accept the amended accounts. That that in itself tells you that they are not seeking to uphold the rule of law. They are not seeking the public's interest. They are seeking their interest. So he is not the protector of the public. He's the protector of the PNM, and that is a serious disservice to that office and to someone in that role, and disservice to the nation, because you've fallen far short of what is expected of an attorney general. In many other Caribbean countries, and countries within the Commonwealth, the attorney general is a job that's advertised, and you can apply for it, and they appoint an attorney general because they don't like to have that. And obviously, a government may hire someone who they feel will work with them, etc., etc., and someone who they feel supports them, but it's not a politician who is entrenched into the party and party politics like how we have it here. And I think that there's some merit in that system because you don't I mean I feel like we in the last 9 years we have really seen attorneys general come in under this administration who have fallen far short of what is expected of that office, and who have prioritized protecting the party and protecting the PNM over protecting the public. And that's really of grave concern. I think it should be of grave concern to everyone.
Senator, I want to come in here and come back to who are the people who are affected by this draconian development that the PNM tried to introduce here. Who are the people? How many, Arjun, maybe you could come in on this too. How many pensioners do we have presently? What, 200,000?
Yeah, I mean, some recent statistics have been provided in terms of how many people we have, and it is a bit, and like I say, when people are living longer and so on, which is not their fault, and it's just the life. I mean,
Well, what
that's not unique to Trinidad and Tobago either. It's happening all over the world. People are living longer. You have aging populations. People have less children, etc., etc. So I mean, it is affecting. It is an expense. Whether it is the expense that they should be looking to cut is something that we have to consider. I don't think that that's where you start. You don't start with when you're trying to save money, start with your most vulnerable, well, one of your most vulnerable groups, but that's where they choose to start.
Well,
Start with this condominium. That's what they have to start with. This
Correct,
condominium that they
exactly.
did,
If they
right?
cut
I
out
mean, we have
squandermania and
seen that.
corruption, mhm. If they cut out squandermania, corruption, vanity projects, and things of that sort, it may be a much better move
that
than targeting.
Far too more cost overrun. Far too more. In fact, cost overrun, rhymes with oh holla run. You understand? And it takes us. We have a long history of that. But go ahead, guys.
yeah, that's where I wanted to take the conversation. The UNC government between 2010 and 2015, their average budgets were between 58 billion to 65 billion, I believe it. You could correct me if I'm wrong. And the PNM had basically the same kind of expenditure for their budgets from 2015 all the way to 2024. And they came mid-year and they asked for another 5 billion and another 10 billion. Arjun, you can maybe help me out with this. So basically, they budgeted 60 billion, let's say, last year. And then they came in the mid-year and they asked for another 10. And after they came and asked for another 5, so technically they took 75 billion. And they achieved much less. The UNC was able to run the country, carry out pay all their bills, pay the electricity, pay TNTech, pay VAT, and so on, and run the country and build box drains and develop.
And that's where it goes. Our um what Mr. Haripol was alluding to earlier is that we are not even making enough money to meet the basic current expenditure, far less for development projects. So we're borrowing not just for projects, but we're borrowing to finance day-to-day expenditure. It's like you're living in a house and you want to expand the house and you want to do improvements to the house, but you can't even pay the light bill and the water bill. So you're borrowing money to pay the light bill and the water bill and to expand the house. And it's like you're not,
But
how are you gonna live?
the history of the PNM have always shown that they are poor at management of anything. If we
Yeah.
look at what happened from 1956 coming forward, we had refineries and we had sugar and we were exporting cocoa and coffee and rice and milk, even milk. Nestle opened a factory in Trinidad and Tobago. It is the first factory in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
We were producers of milk. And
Mm-hmm.
that is why Nestle came to Trinidad. We were producing tires. Dunlop had a factory in
Factory down Point Fortin. Yeah.
and those things PNM destroyed. And we need the population to understand the extent of what PNM is. It's an elitist government that is only looking after the elitists in the society. Massey grew all the way up the Caribbean and is now in Florida. Allied is all the way up the Caribbean, and all the other PNM financiers have grown. They have benefited. They have malls and shops all over the Caribbean. But
Mm-hmm.
the people of Trinidad and Tobago have not developed. Oil was taken out of the ground in Moruga and Mayaro and Palaseco and in Faizabad. What did the people of Palaseco, how did they benefit from all that oil that came out of the ground? The billions of dollars. We didn't benefit at all. There was no infrastructure, no development, not even roads.
Correct.
I was
And
seven, I was 7 years old when Dr. Eric Williams went down to Point 14 and dig with a shovel, and Kamaluddin Mohammed was there that too, and they turned the sod for a hospital in Point 14 in 1967. I was there. And I spoke with Alim, and he remembers being down there too. They turned the sod for a hospital in Point 14 that never materialized, and it's only when Kamala Prasad decided to put a
Started
hospital.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
Started it. And yeah.
But money was allocated from the IADB. I was talking to Alim about that last night, and he remembered going and spending the weekend down in Point 14 when that happened. And everybody denies it. Money was borrowed. Money was borrowed, and no hospital was built. None.
Yeah.
Same thing
two
highway
things
to Mayaro. Same thing.
two things quickly. Oh, when you finish, go ahead.
No, same thing happens. So it's mismanagement, and they are always targeting the poor. It's like what the good senator was saying earlier. The differences between the governments is important for the population, for us to educate the population and get them to understand the demographic, the not the demographics, but the people in Trinidad. We need to look at it. Our culture, the poor people and the middle class people don't take care of their parents. So pension is very important for older people. People, we have to admit to our society and what it is. 75% of the population lives with an income of less than $7,000. 75%.
Yeah.
And their children, the parents spend their lives, our parents spend their lives educating their children grow up and they buy all the fancy stuff. That is the culture of Trinidad and Tobago and the culture of this modern world. They buy all their fancy stuff and they expect that their parents will survive. They don't really turn back and try to help parents. So if you take away the pension from the parents and they have to pay property tax now on that, remember the lines that we saw when people rush to pay property tax? Who are in those lines? You saw any
Lots
young
of elderly, a lot of elderly people. I'll tell
Exactly.
you one thing too, the culture in Trinidad, a big part of the culture of Trinidad is by parents is not to accept help from their children because
Exactly.
they view their role as to help their children. So there are big people, I would say me, like people like me, my age, my group, that our parents are still helping us. When I bought my house, my parents helped me. When I education, my parents helped me. When I everything I wanted in my life, they look after my children.
Correct.
I am not looking after them. I am working, and they are looking after my children. So that is the culture of Transbago. And my parents live on a pension, not the senior citizens pension, but they
Well,
live on their pension.
well, exactly. That is what I wanted to get at. I saw the joy, and it's bringing tears to my eyes now, of my great grandmother when she had to take from her pension and come and give all of us before school start
Hmm.
a little money to go to school.
Of course, that's
So
how
that
that's part of the culture of our country. It's not
and
that
we're taking that joy away from these old people.
well, we're taking away their ability to be self-sufficient if you punish them for having savings. They basically there's another thing too that I love is so if you save if the government doesn't know how much money you have saved up at home, you're gonna drive people away from the system, the banking system, and so on, and then what they do, make themselves a target for criminals because everybody know old people keeping the money at home and they're not banking it because if they bank it, you're gonna not be able to get your pension. I don't know if they don't think about all the repercussions that can result from a stupid, uh, ill-advised policy like that,
They
and that's the
are
only
a,
way to put it.
there are a government who are not in touch with the people. They advise the people who lived elite lives. They are not people who came from the grassroots.
They don't know that Christmas time about grandmothers who save the Danish cookie tin and save money in it and hide it under the bed. They don't know about
Exactly. They don't know
that.
about it. So
Yeah.
they know about a grandmother taking from her pension to buy gifts for her grandchildren
Yeah,
for next week.
exactly.
They don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, my
But
same
no,
grandmother.
knowing the sacrifice our parents made, right? How can we sit so quiet and let this government take their homes or tax them with a very, I mean, ridiculous amount of money, that is going to actually, in America here, you can't pay the property tax, you lose your home. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to take your home and give it to somebody else to live.
And
Or,
I
or some,
really it comes back down to this. Like I say, if you're living in a country where you are paying taxes, but you're receiving so many services and you're receiving them efficiently, I could perhaps say, well, okay, and the taxes are fair and the thing and the whatever. But in a country where you cannot get the medicine you need when the hospital when you go there, you have an emergency, you might wait 8 hours lying on a bench waiting for a bed because there aren't enough beds in the hospital and
it
all those
always
things.
is good.
You are correct. You want to talk about paying more taxes for services. I mean, you have to be getting services before you could, pay people the more tax because, okay, an elderly person in a developed country where you're getting services, they don't have to have money saved up and allocated and put aside that in the event that they get a heart attack, they need to be able to go to a private medical facility to get treatment. Because if you go to the general hospital, you might die waiting for a doctor to come and see you. So they could probably, all right, I'll pay my taxes, but I'm benefiting. I'm benefiting from these things. I'm not paying private security to patrol in my area because I live in a thing. I'm not paying extra money because I want to live in a gated community. I'm not all of those things because of crime. So the basic look, the very first things you learn in economics and so on, when you start off as a high school student doing now, we call it principles of business and
Business.
things like that. You learn about the basic goods and services provided by the state and how those things are, in certain economies, even in mixed economies, these are the things that the state will always provide certain basics. And what do you talk about? You talk about health, you talk about education, you talk about national security. And those are the
Public goods. We call public goods.
yeah, public goods, exactly. Those are the three public goods that and the areas that get the biggest allocation every year in every budget that we pass. And those are the three areas that are severely lacking. Look at how many children cannot fit into the traditional school system because of certain special needs and so on, and they just don't cater for them. They're just not catering for them. You don't have enough room for them. You don't have enough teachers in schools. The schools are in a bad condition. Children are losing days and weeks and sometimes a whole month because of the condition of schools being infested with rats. They're just not maintaining anything. So all of these things factor into the reason why people, you have some pushback when it comes to taxes and so on. And,
But
they
not
think
property tax.
one.
I do not support the property tax. Let me tell you something. I ended up running for mayor 1 year here in the U.S.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons I ran is because a senior citizen grabbed my hand when I was voting for Obama and said, "Please help me." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The town looks everything run nice." She said, "No, it's not." She was on the Social Security benefit. Her father was 90 something years. She was 60 something years. And if he dies, she's going to lose the house because they can't pay the property tax. We have too many senior citizens in this country. Either have to sell their home or do something with it or lose it after the end of the day. So the property tax structure is the very wrong way to go because number one, you're not bring a private home is not bringing income. If you want to tax a person who's renting the home
Agreed, 100%. I
based
100%
on a
agree.
percentage and they're making a revenue out of it,
Correct. Yeah.
then okay, that's something different. That
Yeah.
is
You
it's
can
a commercial business,
tax a revenue earning
right?
assets,
So
but to
taxing
tax.
the private home, and in particular for me, knowing the sacrifice my parents made, and all of us in the same category, knowing that how much they plant the yard and they plant the garden to save money and whatever they did, and you see that firsthand and your grandparents, and to know that most of us did not get no assistance from PNM government,
Mhm.
right? And the level of discrimination, and we couldn't even know what an NHA loan was, much less to get borrowed, right? We had that wasn't existing for we, and for them, for we to stay quiet and allow them to take advantage of us, that can't work for me.
Mhm.
That can't work for me. So we have to fight
Senator,
them tooth and nail.
Mhm.
Senator, I want you to clarify, and if I'm wrong, tell me. But this property tax, we as me, for example, I'm in the Shogunas Borough Corporation. I pay my taxes to Board of Inland Revenue, not to the Shogunas Borough Corporation.
Mhm.
Don't they still have to sit there and wait for a release from the Minister of Finance?
So this is another um next bait and switch that the government has done, and I think people need to be reminded of it. They campaign on this property tax as being something that will improve local government because we have local government reform and all the money that's collected going into local government, blah, 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 blah. There are two things. One, and I specifically asked the new Minister of Local Government about it when he appeared before a Joint Select Committee, about whether or not they would be collecting it directly. And he said things weren't put in place for it for this year, but by next, so they're still operating under the system where all the money goes to inland revenue, paid into the consolidated fund, and it will be disbursed. So that's one thing. So yes, they'll still have to wait on the releases. But two, the Minister of Finance can actually switch up the appropriation of money. And they justify it by saying, well, a place like Mayaro, you don't have that many residents, so the amount of money that they will get. So the minister can actually increase or decrease allocations to different corporations.
So take from one corporation and give to another. That's what you're saying?
Well, remember, the property tax is only one aspect of the revenue that they will receive, but they will also receive the regular some parts of their regular allocation for from government, from central government, right?
Right.
And based on how much property tax is collected, they can reduce and take money
Right,
from one
right,
corporation
right,
and give it
right.
to another one and reappropriate it. So yeah, so
Right.
basically, yeah, you will be there's no they will change up the funding. So but that is also, and I know what they're going to do. What they're going to do is say, well, you collect property tax here, so we're reducing the allocation to this particular corporation and we're going to put it in that corporation and we're going to invest the money in this and that, because at the end of the day, we see certain corporations, the ones that are split almost down the middle and they're looking to sway towards the P&M, we see a lot of expenditure. You see already, you see CPF. I live in San Fernando. San Fernando has 9 electoral districts, right? 5 of them are held by the PNM, 4 of them are held by the UNC. So there's just this one seat separating us on either side. And you see a clear level of investment and resources being allocated into the PNM areas, and particularly the ones that are a little bit tenuous and that can go either way. You
Marginal.
see a lot of work. Yeah, the ones that are very, the ones that have
discrimination.
that can change hands. You see the work there. And the minute the UNC win the seat that they wanted to focus on, all of a sudden, you had 5 CPEP gang, you only have 1 or none at all working in those areas anymore. You see the discrimination. So this whole system about, oh, we collect any tax and go, that is absolute rubbish. And everybody knows what this government is capable of and how they operate. And so I don't anticipate that people paying the most taxes will actually see the benefit of those taxes in their areas. I will put my head on a block and say that I do not expect to see that at all. Because
But go ahead.
no, like even again within San Fernando, within the 9 districts, not all of the homes have been assessed throughout the districts like this. You see much more people in certain areas being assessed and getting the assessment notice for this year and having to pay the property tax. And
It's
some people
targeted. It's very much targeted.
very much targeted. Now, is it that they're going to put more money into picking up the garbage in some areas and not in the other areas? Are you going to fix the road and say only people living in these areas could drive on it? No, everybody's going to benefit. But some people are paying and some are not paying at all. Some people are paying much more and some people are paying much less. But at the end of the day, the services, the local government services, will be enjoyed equally by everyone.
Senator, I wanted to go back to the conversation a little bit earlier, the discussion a little bit earlier on the budget aspect of things.
Mhm.
And I think Trini was saying, they basically spending the same amount as the UNC government did and coming back in the midterm review and asking for more money and all of that. But one interesting thing that I wanted to point out is there is an allocation to the PSIP, which is basically the government's capital budget.
Yeah, capital.
And while they are spending the total amount in the budget, very little is being spent on the PSIP. They don't spend the allocation at all.
No.
So it is approved by Parliament. It is passed and approved, but it is not spent. But the total amount is being spent. So I think one of the things there is because the PNM simply doesn't have a plan. They never did and they never will.
Well,
so they get the money approved and then they spend it as they see fit.
Correct.
Without having a plan.
Approved, yeah. Well, not just having, but I think they have a plan. Their plan is to spend it where they can reap maximum benefit to themselves.
Political benefit.
Political benefits. You see, they are about being in government, but they are not about governance. They are about power and not people. So, however, they have to spend the money. It's not about spending money for the benefit of the people. It's about spending money to the benefit of keeping themselves in power. It is about keeping themselves in government, but not governing a country. Governing a country is different from being in government. Governing a country is having a developmental program that's geared towards certain objectives. What are the objectives? What are we striving towards? What are the pillars of development that they have set for this country? How does the legislative agenda develop? We have never seen a legislative agenda from this government, but if they have one, how does it support the development goals that they have set. And so, what are your development goals? I don't know. Does anybody know? Can you tell me? I don't know. I don't think they know. So they are like headless chickens, just running around the place, doing things to, I would say, pacify the population, serve their interest,
Mama guy
serve
to
the,
keep
yeah, mama guy
themselves,
people, serve the
enriching
interest of
themselves
their,
and their friends.
serve the interest of their friends and family and finances, and that's what they're about. So you don't really need that is the plan that they have, and one that they've executed quite well. But with respect to development of the country, no, they haven't. I'll give you a simple example. Last year, and this is one of the things that I raised in my budget. Sadly, it has read its head in a different way, which I don't want to get into now. That's for a later time. But I raised the issue of the development, the PSIP budget allocation for the fire service, and how much they had actually spent. And because just before budget, there was another statement issued by the second division president for the Fire Services Association, second division, and he was lamenting the amount of, the lack of firefighting equipment and appliances, and working conditions and all of those things, and how many stations were closed and how many stations were without proper things, and about the breathing equipment and all of those things. And you would think that those things, you would see more expenditure and all of that, and we didn't. What we saw is I think about $1 million on some wooden ladders, and that was about it. I didn't, and so I think a lot of people were very disappointed, and questions were raised there. Like I say, that conversation has now hit the public space once more, very sadly, in very, very sad circumstances. But it's a conversation that the UNC has been raising from time to time, and we've been asking questions about it simply because the persons within the service have been raising it. So are you really spending money to improve our national security and the different arms of national security? Fire, army, police, Coast Guard, lifeguard. Are you really improving those things?
We don't see with the millions and billions allocated to national security. We
You're
don't
not
see
seeing
the
the
value
benefits.
for money. All the big hoorah about passing this legislation and that legislation, and the UNC holding it up, and them trying to fix the crime. What legislation improve the resources
Well,
accessible? You know,
legislation could only enable you to take action. And if you don't take action, then all you have are just words printed on paper sitting around in books collecting dust. So
right?
they could complain how much they want about legislation, and they could try to pass all the legislation in the world, and they could pass, and they have passed quite a lot of legislation with the assistance of the opposition. And has it made a difference? Because the operationalization of it, the implementation of it, they have
Exactly.
failed. They have failed, and
That
they failed miserably.
that
But
that is what
they've
that is what
managed
we should
to
have focused on.
they've managed to put a conversation out in the public that PNM and UNC is the same thing, and people are buying into that. So I think the opposition has to work hard at putting facts outside there that changes that narrative. But it's
Well,
a narrative that's out there.
in
That's
five
why we
years,
got this
they
program
built,
going.
yeah, in 5 years, did they build 9 new police stations? If they didn't, then we are not the same. In did the UNC ever extend, and cabinet take a decision to extend the term of a commissioner of police who has presided over some massive increases in crime and increases in the murder rate? No, we didn't do that. We went through the process, and we let the police service commission, because we believe in process and integrity and so on. Did and abiding by the constitution and independence of certain bodies. Did anybody in the UNC ever thief a merit list and remove it so that we could just basically, because you have a personal conflict with a person who had screened for a position like commissioner of police, which is supposed to be independent? No, we didn't do that. Did the other UNC government ever try to prevent the auditor general from laying her report by threatening her with pre-action protocol letters? Not that we know of. Nobody in the UNC ever did that. So I don't know. Did the UNC government ever allow all of our Coast Guard vessels to be parked up and basically not functioning, and several of our CCTV camera network to be down and malfunctioning and not operational, while crime was skyrocketing, and guns and ammunition and illegal immigrants and all those things were just entering the country free sheet? No, we didn't have such a massive problem with those things when UNC was in government. So to me, The stories are there, the evidence is there. Maybe we have too much of a short-term memory. And I agree with you, that's why programs like this are important. But yes, people do need to be reminded that those things didn't happen under UNC
We
government,
need
and they
to sing
never
it.
happened.
We need
But
to sing it.
I,
We need to
Senator,
sing it.
I want to take it to the ground level. The UNC government never took any taxes from anybody in their
Never
home
increased a
office.
single tax,
The UNC
and did
never
so
took
much.
a gas subsidy. The UNC never took their book grant. The UNC tried to introduce a system where there would be free books, where you would have books in schools and so on. So the poor and the vulnerable benefited
The
from the
UNC gave everybody a laptop and had already begun the process of
correct.
embarking on an e-textbook
The
initiative. Do you know after 9 years of them being government, only this year they're talking about an e-textbook initiative? Tim Gopi
correct.
Singh as Minister of Education had that program ready to go and had started that whole process. And part of that, of course, you can't start that process unless you had a digitally literate school
Yeah,
population. And that's where the laptop
Correct.
yeah.
initiative came
Correct.
in. Not
Correct.
just that everybody had access to a laptop, but they sort of had all the same standards and so on to utilize it. And so then we were going to have an e-textbook initiative and so on. And all of that is about creating equality within our education system. But PNM not about that. When
Well,
schools shut down because of COVID, you had some schools, particularly private schools or the more well-to-do schools, where children seamlessly transition into online school. And then you had schools where children had never seen a computer in their life. Their parents didn't have phones. They have Me Too phones. And the children just were simply locked out of the school system. That is the inequality that the PNM have continued to embrace and to propagate.
Speaking of that, I had people who was locked out of the country,
Well, yeah.
right? Was asking us for help to get a device to their children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because
Exactly.
I was dealing with that part of things, right?
Yes.
With
Yeah.
people locked out of the country, asking for help with a device, and I had to reach out to people in Trinidad to get a device for their kids.
There were some schools that say, well, if you don't have a device, they'll print the material and the parents can come in and collect it, but you had to pay for your own prints and so on. I was literally um just at my office because lawyers we were allowed to operate, right? And so on. I was literally just having parents and telling parents, like, you can come to my office and I'll photocopy all this stuff for you for free, because some schools didn't even have paper and photocopy proper functioning photocopy machines to do it for them. So the principal would lend them some of the material and say, look, you can go and make a copy and drop it back tomorrow. And these parents now have to find hundreds of dollars. Most of them now working. They're out of a job because of COVID and because of the lockdown. I talk about people who work in, how many of our single mothers work in bar and restaurants and that kind of thing. All of them were out of a job, casinos, etc. And so they couldn't even afford to photocopy the children's material, and you had to depend on goodwill from citizens to help you basically photocopy things. But not everybody was so lucky, and a lot of kids fell out of the school system because of that and basically dropped out and just never returned. And then they want to know why crime increasing and why more and more young people choosing to get into crime. You deprive people of an education, or you have an education system that simply isn't serving the needs of the children. Where do you think they're going to go? Where are they going? What are they going to gravitate towards? They are going to gravitate towards a life of crime. You see, PNM, again, it's about the narrow-mindedness. You think passing one piece of legislation to restrict bail or whatever it is, it appeals to the emotions of people. Put them in jail, lock them up. We locking them up and we're not letting them out for 120 days. When it comes to the 120 days, what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? It's like you're not thinking about what has landed them in this situation in the first place where they may have committed a crime. Why are they there? Is it because of poverty? Is it because you cut their grants? Is it because the school system has failed them? Is it because you need greater social interventions in terms of dealing with children who are exposed to domestic violence situations? You need whatever it is. You have to to deal with the cause. You can't just deal with the effect. And they're not even dealing with the effects. They just have stopgap measures in between. Short-sightedness and a lack of cohesive policy is what is really hampering them from making any progress with all of the billions of dollars that they're spending.
We are throwing too many people in jail that should not be in jail, and there should be more of a community service for penalty to their conduct, right? I mean, if a man smoking a piece of weed and he not doing anybody any harm, why throw him in jail? You
What he
know,
might really need is some sort of rehabilitation and counseling. If he has a drug addiction problem.
yeah.
What we also need to do and deal with, I think, is we must have a system of parole. whereby people who are released from prison continue to be monitored. We must have electronic monitoring for people who are out on bail. You can't just simply put people in a cell. The prisons are overrun with people and the conditions are
We've seen some
horrendous.
pictures of that. Yeah.
Yeah, the conditions are horrendous. And you can't put
Yes.
10 men,
Inhumane.
yeah, you can't put 10 men to live in a 12 by 12 cell indefinitely and say, well, okay, stay there while you're waiting trial. Trial taking 5 and 10 and 12 years to happen. And you want to keep them there, and you think that they're gonna come out there and be what, after they serve their term, be upstanding citizens. No, you have to manage offenders. Offender management is an actual thing. It's a specialty. It's something that you have to focus on. You have to have people dedicated to it. You have to have the resources dedicated to it. Those things would be a lot more beneficial than, like I say, some of these vanity projects and paintings and all this and crazy things that they spend money on and they find to spend money on. How much money they spend on having a crime symposium? You need to have a crime symposium. You could come and talk to me for free, and I gotta tell you everything you need to know about how you could start dealing with the crime situation. And I could have give them, I mean, 100. I could list 100 different initiatives that you can implement now, that you will see short, medium, and long term results in relation to offender management and ultimately a reduction in crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And I guess it could do that for free. You didn't need to have a big conference in Harris and invite the whole Caribbean to come there and have a conference of crime as a public health issue. Wow, it sounds nice. The media pay a big thing about it, and it's a whole circus. What has happened? Crime has gone up. Crime has gone up since that conference. We've had more
You know
murders
what?
this year. So
What the
what do you
people
mean?
has to understand is that what we are about, in that the things that we are proposing, that we are setting a structure for the children from an early stage to be educated and channel in the right direction, so we don't have to deal with the problem that
And
we're dealing with now.
have opportunities for jobs and employment, and that comes back to being able to attract investment, being able to build your economy so that there are jobs available. What is the point in sending children to school and creating opportunities for them to get an education, and then they just have no jobs that
Right, right.
they can get
But
into?
the early childhood learning proposal that Mrs. Bisesa had, when the initiative that she started.
Mhm.
I mean, could you imagine what would have been the drastic difference by now? After three terms in government,
Mhm.
so we would have seen a drastic difference. But I want the people to understand what they voted against, because they voted against themselves. Those that need these services the most jump up and vote for a government that took away all these resources for them, and their lives could have been much more better. The laptop, the baby grant, I mean, you name it. The school we were improving. We built 106 schools. We would have built more by now. The medical facilities would have been improved. The ones that we started, we should show we'd have built more by now. And the children's hospital would have been fully operational. We'd have possibly added more resources to that. It was fully equipped. And you voted against a government that was putting all these things in place for you to help you advance your lives. Putting the structure for you, the working mothers, the single mother that has the necessary childcare and all these things.
Mhm.
You are the people that need this the most,
Yeah,
and you're buying to the garbage that Dr. Rowley and his team sold you, and you re-elected them for a second term.
yeah.
So I mean, hopefully that we can spend enough time educating and getting enough information out there for them to see, because they know the PNM tried to wipe the slate clean. That all the good thing that was put in place by the PPG government didn't exist at all. They even denied the school and all these different things. So maybe you can, add
Yeah.
some things to that and reiterate,
Yeah,
that
no,
point.
I mean, I think, people, um, I don't know. People are often distracted, and there's only one good thing that the PM can do. There's only one thing that they are experts at, and that is propaganda. And they are so good at propaganda that people put aside, as you rightly say, you vote against your own interests because you buy into the propaganda, and that is what has happened. 2020, I think a lot of it was that they lied and manipulated facts in relation to COVID, and people seem to think that they were doing such a great job at managing COVID, when in fact I think what they were doing is just suppressing numbers. And secondly, I think the promise of the refinery and what they had promised to do, they bought themselves a lot of votes for that, only to turn around and really betray the OWTU and their membership with respect to the sale to Patriotic Energies and so on. And like I say, if it's up to people to make them pay a price for that now. It is up to the people of this country to wake up and to realize and to ask yourself, how did you feel between 2010 and 2015 living in this country, and how do you feel now? And if the answer is not as good and much worse, well, then you know what you have to do. That's all I could say. But yes, it does it is beneficial, sorry, for us to continue to remind people about some of the blunders made by this government, and also some of the accomplishments of the previous government.
Don't forget, once the election bell rings, the race card will be pulled out, and don't discount the significance of the race card as well.
Yeah, well, I think that they really, that's usually the where they go when they get very desperate, and
Yep.
very unfortunate. But I am the eternal optimist, and I see a lot of young people now coming up, and I think one of the things that we have to do as an opposition is really target these younger people, because race is less of an issue for them. It is. They focus a lot more on issues and a lot less on those things. They are very much more aware, and they are aware of how politics works in other countries and so on. So they are not, their understanding of politics isn't confined to what they grew up with in the 1950s and 60s with Eric Williams and that kind of thing. That they're not pigeonholed into that type of thinking. They have a broader set of thinking, and you can, it's just the simple access to information that they have, and all of that. They see the way things work in other parts of the world. They're a lot more exposed, they're a lot more educated, aware, and because of that, I think race is less of an issue. So we need to reach those things. One of the problems with the other side of the coin of people being so aware and so on is that a lot of them are very disillusioned by what they see in Trinidad and Tobago, and so they stay away. They show no interest whatsoever. So you have a lot of non-voters. We have to reach them. We have to reach them,
Exactly,
because
exactly,
that is
exactly.
how you get them to come out there, because the tribal voting and the base of, I don't care what crapo and bodies they tie, I'm voting for them kind of people, or whoever you put
Yeah,
in, or
yeah,
you
yeah.
safe seat will be in they will be voting in it. Those people are going to come out, right? And it's the ones who are just disillusioned. We have to reach them, and we have to convince them that we can
On the
do
social media platform, which is very effective. We saw that with President Obama when he took that option to utilize the social media to reach the young
Yeah, I
people.
think social media. I mean, look, there's no. I also think that there's really no substitute for touch and flesh, getting
Yeah,
on
yeah.
with.
I'm just saying, but
Yeah,
that's one means that
no,
channel.
because
Yeah,
information is so readily available on social media, and it's not like think about it this way: if you have a constituency meeting somewhere, and 100 people can come, those 100 people might hear exactly what you have to say. When you say it on social media, and it's there forever, and you'll get 100 views today and 100 views tomorrow, and by next week you have 1,000 views, and your reach, the reach of social media is incredible. It really
yeah.
is. So
But
it's
we do a
about
combination,
yeah, yeah, of
combination.
course. You understand the different platforms, you understand the reach, you figure out where the people are, how to effectively use the different forms of media. And yeah, we can expand our reach. But like I say,
Well,
that young, that we call them, I think Gen Z is what they call them, that Gen Z population who might be voting for the first time in this election in 2025. We have a lot of work to do with them. We have to get them involved, and we have to get down the ground, get reach them.
right, exactly, and those are the people that Mrs. BC give a laptop to, so they should be reminded about that. Definitely, I've shared the idea of the party groups. You see, because what happened is how President Obama won his election. He didn't wasn't dependent on the executives of the region. He went outside that, so he allowed people to form a party group. Like you could form a party group in your house, and you
Hmm.
grab 10 people there, and you get in that 10 votes out there, in your street. So you form a party group here, and all in the interest. They're not working under the realm of the constituency executive, but they are working for the party.
Hmm.
You
Well,
know,
Yeah.
basically outside that, because a lot of times we have had, issues where, people cannot get along for some reason or the other, and they stay out of the realm of things. But we want to be able to make it where people, that you don't limit people, we don't limit ourselves in the reach, and
Because
you
every
create
vote
that
counts.
opportunity.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So if a person wants to go there and get votes, we create that opportunity, platform, and for the information to share what we about, and you don't totally depend on the executive for that particular area.
Mhm.
You don't put the restrictions on ourselves then, basically.
Yeah.
So
Fair
that's
enough.
something we have to look at. So
Look
we
at,
have to
yeah,
look
for sure.
outside of the executive, but allow them to form the party groups.
Yeah.
These are
Perhaps.
things that needs to be done. Um, one more thing I wanted to cover with you. Now, the the situation with the FULs, um, the current structure that we have, where the commissioner alone gets to sign off on that,
Mm-hmm.
that structure has to change. Here, where I live, the municipal government, the chief of police, gets to sign off on that here. So it becomes a less burdensome than having you go into the state police.
Mm-hmm.
So it's being dealt at the municipal level. So, for instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, we could have a senior superintendent who's in charge of the station, the municipal area, that
Well,
that
the,
they
the
breaks
the
down
process
the
right now,
workload.
yeah, the process right now is that it goes through your district and they have to make the recommendation and so on, but the final say lies with the commissioner. Um, there are quite a number of matters before the court right now with people challenging the commissioner simply because I think a lot of those people have gone through the process of freedom of information. And what they're seeing is that it's recommended from the district level and so on, but then the commissioner is refusing them or just simply not dealing with it. So the matter remains pending for years and years and years. And those things are being challenged now before the courts. And we'll see what happens. I agree that there needs to be some restructuring. What I will never understand is why there's so much focus on this, a lot more focus on the issuing of FULs to law-abiding citizens than keeping the
The
illegal guns.
criminals,
Than
yeah, the
keeping the
criminals.
illegal guns off the street and the illegal guns aren't being sold by licensed firearm dealers. They are being sold by they coming in through the illegal ports of entry and legal ones too because scanners not working on the port, etc., etc. So the the focus on this thing is it seems very personal with the government and certain dealers and so on. But again, it's about a government that's serving their own needs, their own purpose, and those of their
Yeah.
friends and family and finances, and not the needs of the people.
And keeping that racket going where some people had to pay big money just to get an approval. But I'm saying, for us, the workload is constant. Beside the political
Aspect of
biasness,
it. The workload is,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, the workload. I mean, we're not living in times of equivalent. We're not, in the 60s and 70s where people respected the police with a baton and then challenging. We are living in a time where people are shooting at the police.
it's
In
like
fact,
war.
we recently saw some. I saw some notes there about a soldier was shot and had to be in a closed casket because of the damages that was done by a high-powered rifle. So they keep talking about big fish and all these different things. But what I'm telling you is, it doesn't, within minutes. Any little wannabe can get a pirogue and bring whatever he wants across from Venezuela. It doesn't
Correct.
have to be
Yeah,
a big fish. So I
exactly.
mean, the focus on the big fish is any amount of things coming across our borders. So the border security is a high issue,
Very.
and so I mean, all the politics and propaganda around the whole situation and playing games, it's not getting us anywhere. There's no results there. So the government, I mean, we have seen what they've done with our the resources for the Coast Guard and all these different
Mhm.
things that, I mean, not even one boat was working
Yeah,
at the
the
time.
Coast Guard, and the ports are two areas that they have neglected. And I think it has contributed significantly to the inflow of illegal firearms into the country. And they can't deny that. There's no way they can deny that. It's
Right. So,
plainly obvious. Yeah. So
Senator, I know I kept you quite a bit, but we enjoyed speaking with you, and there was a lot of information that we find valuable with you.
mhm.
Is there anything else that you would like to add? I mean, definitely. First of all, I want to say that this channel is open to you. Anytime there's an issue, you want to make a point, there's something going on, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Okay.
I
Thank
will
you.
reach out to you and can you comment on this? Something transparent in Parliament.
Sure.
This is available to you as needed. So definitely that, and to all your colleagues out there, I've said the same thing to them that I will channels available to you. In seconds, you need to say something. We can do that. So
Okay.
with that, I want to thank you. I know I kept you away from the kids quite a bit here,
It's okay.
and thank you for taking time for joining us. And if there's any last things that you would like to say.
Well, I mean, well, of course, I want to wish everyone a very a safe and a happy Christmas. I hope that everyone finds the time to find some joy and happiness with your family, friends, loved ones during the Christmas period. For those who aren't having the best Christmas, we know that those are, not everyone is happy and jolly at this time of year. Our thoughts are with you, and I want to encourage everyone to keep up the fight. Your members of your group, and anyone who's listening, Trinidad and Tobago is home to all of us, even those who have left and reside abroad. They still take a very special interest, as evidenced by the existence of this group. They take an interest in what is happening here, and we have to all come together and try to save this country. The UNC doesn't just have plans, we also have the competencies, I think, and we have proven that from our past record, and you would see it and hear it now in terms of the kind of work that we are doing. And so I would implore you to keep up the fight, keep up the struggle, get people out to vote when the election bell is rung, and on when everything that happens now and what we're saying and what we're doing is great, but it comes down to election day between 6 and 6, every single vote that counts. And so that's why we have to ultimately get our focus in getting the votes out on that day, and taking some action to change the course that our country is currently on, because it's not leading to a very good place. So with that, I think that's all I would want to add. So thank you very
I
much for having me.
Thank you very much, sister, and we're looking forward to having you back again.
Sure.
As time goes by. Gentlemen, you have anything else to say to Senator Jayanti as you go?
Thank you, Senator, for being here and enlightening us with all the issues.
Mhm.
And your message to the population and to the listeners is exactly what we have to keep working on, and remind them that there is a difference between the UNC and the
Mhm.
people. UNC is government for the people, always, always concerned about the people, and we always serve the.
Mhm. For sure.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Jayanti
Senator.
has anything? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very much, Senator, for your usual enlightenment and very invaluable contribution. And to you and yours, blessed and holy and safe Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Same to you. And have a good night, gentlemen.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Senator. Good night. Okay, we'll
Good night.
talk again soon. Thank you. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us, and we will continue the information and education on this platform going forward. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.